Now in this video, I'm going to introduce a new concept, or actually two new concepts, the word univalent and the word ambivalent. But before I explain what those mean and their significance, I want to be clear about something so that you understand this. Whether somebody is univalent or whether somebody is ambivalent, everybody processes information the same way. We sample attitudes from the top of our head, mostly. We also sample attitudes from the back of the head, and based on that sample, we express an opinion. I have a feeling that you're probably tired of me repeating that phrase over and over again, but it's such an important part of understanding the memory-based model that I feel like I just want to repeat it again and again, and I'll explain to you why later. So what is this distinction between univalence, people who are univalent, and people who are ambivalent? So the word valence, just so you know, comes from the word valence, and valence refers to sort of intrinsically positive or intrinsically negative feelings about something. So when somebody is univalent, what I'm basically saying is that they have sort of one dominant feeling about whatever we're talking about. Now, before I start off, let me make clear that being univalent doesn't mean that you're closed-minded. For example, in the last video, I talked about the question about whether the Earth is round or flat, right? I'm hoping that for most of you, you're univalent when it comes to the question of whether the Earth is round or flat. My opinions are I know that I am, my opinions are very set on that. All of my attitudes, all of my information lead me to believe that the Earth is round, right? I'm not closed-minded about it. Those are just the facts, okay? The same thing would pertain to the question about whether the Earth goes around the sun or the sun goes around the Earth. I'm univalent when it comes to that particular issue. It doesn't mean I'm closed-minded. So don't think of univalent or ambivalent as a personality type. In the technical language that we use in political science, whether somebody is univalent or whether they're ambivalent is domain specific. You're not going to need to remember that term. But what it means is it pertains to a particular question. So let's go back to univalence. People who are univalent are people who have consistent attitudes. And what I mean by consistent is that if you think back to the picture of Homer that I had before, and I displayed his attitudes as pluses and minuses, somebody who's univalent is going to have predominantly plus attitudes, positive attitudes, at both the top of the head and the back of the head. Or they can have predominantly negative attitudes in the top of the head and the back of the head, right? That's what characterizes univalence, that if we were able to see inside their heads, what we would notice was that they lean strongly in one direction or the other, and we could tell that by the attitudes they had stored in memory. Well, people who are univalent only accept information that confirms their pre-existing beliefs. Anytime that they're presented with information that challenges those pre-existing beliefs, they reject that information. The other way that we talk about this is that they counter-argue that information. Let me go back to the example of the Earth being round or flat. If somebody comes in and they're giving an argument about why the Earth is flat, as they're giving you their facts about why the Earth is flat, what would be going on in your head? Wouldn't you be thinking, as they made one claim, wouldn't you be thinking, but what about this? And what about that? What about this? In your own mind, you'd be responding to their claims. That's what we mean by counter-arguing. That people who are ambivalent are going to reject or counter-argue information that challenges their pre-existing beliefs. And so as a result, the information that they have stored in memory is consistent, right? They have pluses or minuses, predominantly one or the other in their head, right? As a result, the opinions they express don't change. Because let's say we're talking, the question is about, do you approve or disapprove of the job the president is doing? If a person has overwhelmingly positive attitudes at the top of the head and overwhelmingly positive attitudes at the back of the head, what are they going to say? They're going to say they approve. Even though they're doing a random sample, if all there are positive attitudes at the top of the head and positive attitudes at the back of the head, when they take that sample, they're going to say, I approve. And unless something changes, if they're asked the same question a month later, they're going to say, I approve. If they're asked a question a month later, they're going to say, I approve. Because even though they're taking random samples, they're always going to wind up with more positive than negative attitudes. And so as a result, the opinions they express, are they going to be stable or unstable? Now, if you have to think back to the previous lecture video when I defined stable opinions. Will univalence, will they express unstable or stable opinions? Well, hopefully you said stable, because that's exactly right. Univalence will express stable opinions over time because of the composition of positive and negative attitudes in their head. Well, then let's move on to ambivalence, people who are ambivalent. Where ambivalence is different from univalence is that ambivalence have inconsistent attitudes at the top of their head and the back of their head. Going back to our question of whether or not they approve or disapprove of the president, they might have an equal number of positive attitudes and negative attitudes, both at the top of the head and the back of the head. The thing that makes ambivalence particularly important in understanding public opinion is that when they're confronted with information, they don't counter-argue. They accept most information that they're presented with. They don't have very strong views, and so they have no reason to counter-argue. So when they're presented with information, they're like, oh, I didn't know that. They're presented with more information, they're like, oh, I didn't know that. And they continue to accept information. As I said, they don't counter-argue information. As a result, the information that they have stored in memory is not consistent. They don't have all pluses or all minuses in the top and back of the head. For our purposes, we can just assume that somebody who's truly ambivalent has an equal number of pluses and minuses both in the top of the head and the back of the head. So when they take a random sample of attitudes in order to express an opinion, what's going to happen? Are the opinions that they express going to be stable or unstable? Well, hopefully you said unstable, because if they have an equal number of positives and negatives in the top of the head and back of the head, well, sometimes they're going to take a random sample and they're going to get more positives than negatives. Sometimes they're going to take a random sample and they're going to get more negatives than positives. And then sometimes they make it an equal number and say, like, I don't approve or disapprove. You know, I don't know how I feel. But the opinion they express is going to change over time because the random sampling process is going to produce different opinions. Okay, so this is key to understanding this. Now, in the next video, I'm going to do a visual depiction of this process, so hopefully it'll help sort of make this make more sense. But before I do, I want to focus in on some terminology that will be important and that will help you on the essays. When we talk about attitudes, we talk about them being either consistent or inconsistent. When we talk about opinions, we talk about them being stable or unstable. So be sure that when you're writing out your answers to any essay question, that when you talk about attitudes, use consistent and inconsistent to describe them. So univalence are consistent, ambivalence are inconsistent. When you're talking about the opinions they express, we're going to use stable and unstable. Once again, univalence are stable, ambivalence are unstable in their opinions. And so next will be a sort of visual representation of everything that I just talked about.